You will have breakfast ready at 5 sharp. Mother for Alistair, Evelyn declared, tossing a set of keys onto the polished granite island with a clatter that reverberated through the sun-drenched kitchen. He likes everything his way. A cold knot tightened in Sierra's stomach, a familiar chill she hadn't felt since her divorce, now sharpened by an insult far more intimate. But even as the indignity prickled, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor of satisfaction ran through her, a secret current beneath the placid surface, because Alistair's precise demands for his morning coffee were about to become his undoing. Barely 24 hours earlier, Sierra had been enjoying the tranquil symphony of her Malibu beach house, the rhythmic hush of waves on the shore, the distant cry of gulls, the gentle clink of ceramic against ceramic as she stirred her morning Earl Grey. At 52, she'd cultivated a life of elegant simplicity, a sanctuary where the only demands were her own creative whims. A half-finished canvas on an easel, a stack of philosophical essays waiting on the wicker coffee table, a yoga mat unrolled on the deck, still damp from the morning's dew. This serene existence was her hard-won prize after a tumultuous marriage and a challenging journey raising Evelyn. She thought she'd seen every shade of disappointment her daughter could cast. Boy, was she wrong. The jarring slam of a car door, loud enough to rattle the very foundations of her peace, sliced through the morning calm. Sierra, ever composed, simply lowered her teacup, her gaze drifting towards the glass doors that led to the driveway. There, striding with the determined gait of someone accustomed to getting their way, was Evelyn. Her 28-year-old daughter looked like a storm front in designer linen, trailing 3 massive suitcases and a man Sierra had never seen before. He was impeccably dressed, handsome, in an almost too polished way, and followed Evelyn like a well-trained shadow. Mother Evelyn's voice carried through the closed doors, a familiar clarion call of disruption. She didn't bother knocking, simply pushed through the entrance, hauling a suitcase that looked far too heavy for her slender frame. "We're here." Here. For what exactly, Sierra wondered, her eyebrow arching imperceptibly. The last time they'd spoken 3 weeks prior, Evelyn had hung up on her for the sheer audacity of suggesting that marrying a man she'd known for 6 months might be premature. Evelyn, Sierra said, walking in from the deck, her cup still in hand, a picture of serene surprise. What a delightful surprise. Evelyn was already dragging her luggage towards the guest staircase. Her new husband standing awkwardly by the entryway, looking as though he wasn't quite sure he belonged. Smart man, Sierra thought he shouldn't. Alistair. "This is my mother, Sierra. Mother, this is Alistair, my husband." Evelyn's introduction was heavily emphasized, each word, a deliberate underline, a silent declaration of a life-altering decisions made without maternal consent. Alistair stepped forward, a charming smile, almost too practiced, spreading across his features. He extended a hand that felt firm and cool in Sierra's. "Mrs. Finch, it's wonderful to finally meet you. Evelyn talks about this place constantly." "Does she?" Sierra returned his grip, noting the glint of an expensive watch beneath the cuff of his bespoke shirt. "And what brings you both to my little sanctuary unannounced?" "We're on our honeymoon," Evelyn announced, as if this explanation rendered all impoliteness moot. "We wanted somewhere peaceful and private. Besides, hotels are so impersonal, don't you think?" Sierra glanced around her living room. Her yoga mat still lay unfurled brushes from yesterday's watercolor session, soaked in a forgotten coffee mug, and her latest historical fiction novel lay face down on the sofa. This space was undeniably personal, a quiet haven not set up for unexpected house guests, let alone a honeymooning couple with a penchant for grand entrances. "How long were you thinking of staying?" she asked, already anticipating an answer she wouldn't like. "Just a few days," Alistair interjected quickly, shooting Evelyn a look Sierra didn't miss. "Maybe a week." Evelyn corrected, oblivious to the subtle tension. "We haven't really decided. That's the beauty of being spontaneous, right, Mother? You always said life was about embracing the unexpected." Sierra remembered saying that. Evelyn had been 16, terrified of trying out for the school play. It certainly hadn't been an open invitation to treat her home like a free luxury hotel 3 decades later. Of course, Sierra said, because what else could she say, without immediately descending into a confrontation she wasn't yet ready for? Let me show you to the guest room. As she led them upstairs, Sierra caught Alistair's eyes, sweeping across the spacious rooms, an almost clinical appraisal that went beyond mere admiration. The beach house, modest by Malibu standards, was still worth more than most people's retirement funds. It had been her sanctuary since her divorce 5 years prior, a quiet testament to her independence. "This is beautiful, Mrs. Finch," Alistair said, his tone genuinely appreciative of the property's value. "You have incredible taste." "Thank you." Sierra opened the guest room door, mentally noting the boxes of Christmas decorations piled on the bed. "I wasn't expecting company, so give me a few minutes to make it habitable." "Don't go to any trouble." "Mother," Evelyn chirped, already bouncing on the mattress to test its spring. "We're just happy to be here." "Happy." "Right." Sierra's smile remained fixed, but her mind was already turning. That afternoon, while Evelyn and Alistair walked on the beach, Sierra diligently prepared the room, her thoughts churning. Why did this visit feel different from Evelyn's usual dramatic incursions? It wasn't just the unannounced arrival or the hasty marriage. It was Alistair's calculating gaze, his almost proprietary air that set off alarm bells Sierra hadn't heard in years. By dinner, she had her answer. Alistair excused himself to take a call, leaving Evelyn to help herself to a generous pour of Sierra's finest Sauvignon Blanc. "Mother, I need to talk to you about something." Evelyn began, settling onto the antique sofa, as if it were her personal throne. "I'm listening. Alistair and I, we're not just here for a romantic getaway." Evelyn paused, swirling her wineglass with dramatic flair. "We're here because we think it might be time for you to consider your living situation." "My living situation?" Sierra kept her voice level, a cold dread seeping into her chest. "You're all alone out here. What if something happened? What if you fell or had an emergency, Alistair thinks, and I agree that it might be safer for you to move into something more manageable. You know, closer to town. Maybe a nice condo." Sierra stared at her daughter. This woman she had raised, nursed through countless childhood fevers, supported through a tumultuous 20s, and loved despite a selfish streak that seemed to widen with each passing year. "And you thought you'd just show up here and convince me to sell my house? Not sell it exactly." Evelyn took another sip, avoiding Sierra's gaze. "Alistair has some experience in real estate investment. He thinks this property could be much better utilized if it was, properly managed." The pieces clicked into place, tumblers falling into a chilling alignment. The unexpected visit. The new husband with the expensive taste and the calculating eye. The feigned concern for her welfare, masking a blatant suggestion that Sierra was too old, too frail to manage her own home. "How thoughtful of Alistair to take such an interest in my welfare," Sierra said, her voice laced with an irony Evelyn was too self-absorbed to catch. "Mother, don't be like that. We're trying to help you." "Help me what exactly?" "Make some smart financial decisions. You could live very comfortably on the proceeds from this place, and Alistair could handle all the investment details. It would be like having your own personal financial advisor." For 28 years, Sierra had witnessed Evelyn's extraordinary gift for rationalization. But this was impressive, even for her. Evelyn had married a stranger and was now sitting in Sierra's living room, suggesting she hand over her home to him for proper management. "That's incredibly generous," Sierra said, maintaining her placid expression. "But I'm quite happy with my current living situation." Evelyn's smile tightened. "Mother, you're not getting any younger. Wouldn't it be better to make these changes while you can still enjoy the benefits?" Alistair chose that moment to return from his phone call, his charming smile back in place. "Sorry about that. Business never stops. You know how it is." "Actually, I don't," Sierra said, meeting his gaze directly. What business are you in, Alistair? Property development investment consulting. I help people maximize their real estate potential. How convenient. The three of them sat in silence for a moment, the tension thick enough to spread on toast. Alistair seemed to sense that Evelyn's subtle approach wasn't working. Mrs. Finch, he said, leaning forward with the kind of sincerity that probably worked wonders in board meetings. I hope you don't think we're being presumptuous. Evelyn just worries about you. And when she told me about this beautiful property sitting here underutilized, Sierra looked around her living room. The floor-to-ceiling windows framing the ocean, the fireplace where she'd read countless evenings, the kitchen where she'd learned to cook for one and discovered she actually enjoyed it. Well, for one person, it seems like a lot of house. You're right, Sierra said finally, a new calmness settling over her. It is a lot of house for one person. That's what makes it perfect. The next morning, Sierra stood at the stove preparing scrambled eggs for 3. The smell of cooking butter and fresh coffee filled the kitchen, but the air was heavy with unspoken words. Evelyn, engrossed in her phone, finally looked up. Mother, I need to talk to you about expectations, Evelyn said, not bothering to lower her voice, even though Sierra felt like hired help. What kind of expectations? Sierra asked, flipping eggs that were starting to smell better than this conversation was going. Alistair sat at the counter, engrossed in financial news on his tablet, occasionally humming with professional satisfaction. He'd treated Sierra's home like his personal office space since yesterday, a detail that grated on Sierra's carefully constructed peace. Well, since we're staying here, I think it's important to establish some ground rules. Evelyn looked at her, an expression Sierra remembered from her teenage years, a prelude to an unwelcome announcement. Ground rules, Sierra repeated. Alistair has very specific requirements for his morning routine. He's an early riser, likes to get his day started right. Quality nutrition, a quiet environment for his morning calls with the East Coast. Alistair nodded along as if his wife were discussing something perfectly reasonable, instead of dictating terms in Sierra's own home. That sounds like Alistair's problem to solve, Sierra said pleasantly. Actually, Mother, I was hoping you could help with that. Evelyn's voice took on that wheedling tone that used to work when she was 7 and wanted an extra bedtime story. Since you're always up early anyway and you love to cook, I love to cook for myself on my schedule. Alistair looked up from his tablet, a smile that probably cost thousands in dental work gracing his lips. Mrs. Finch. What Evelyn is trying to say is that we'd be incredibly grateful for any assistance you could provide as the host. Host. Sierra thought the word curdling in her mouth, as if she'd invited them to disrupt her peaceful existence and then start making demands about breakfast service. I see, she said, turning back to her eggs, before she said something that would reveal exactly how she felt about their audacity. It doesn't have to be anything elaborate, Evelyn continued, apparently interpreting Sierra's silence as agreement. Just something ready by 5 o'clock. Alistair likes his coffee strong, no sugar, and maybe some eggs, Benedict, or fresh fruit. Nothing too complicated. 5 a.m. Evelyn wanted Sierra to get up at 4 a.m. to prepare eggs. Benedict for a man she'd known for 6 days, a man who had the gall to suggest her home was underutilized. Eggs, Benedict, Sierra said slowly. Or whatever you think is appropriate. You're so good at this domestic stuff, Mother. It's really one of your strengths. One of my strengths. As if domestic service was a talent she should be proud to share, rather than a set of skills she'd developed to take care of her own home and her own life. Sierra served their breakfast, watching Alistair cut into his eggs with the precision of someone who'd never had to cook for himself. He had probably lived his entire adult life with women eager to prove their worth by anticipating his needs. This is delicious, he said, wiping his mouth delicately with a linen napkin. You're quite the chef, Mrs. Finch. Thank you. It's really perfect training for when you move into a smaller place, Evelyn added, apparently unable to let the real estate conversation go. You'll have so much more time for cooking when you don't have all this space to maintain. After breakfast, they announced they were driving into town to explore and would be back for dinner. They said it like Sierra would be waiting ready to prepare their evening meal, which from their perspective she supposed she would be. But as she watched their rental car disappear down her driveway, Sierra wasn't thinking about dinner preparations. She was thinking about alarm clocks and exactly what kind of surprise she could prepare for Alistair's 5 a.m. breakfast requirement. Sierra spent the afternoon doing research. Not the kind Alistair would expect, though. She started with her laptop, delving into property records and investment companies. Alistair Vance. She found owned 3 LLCs, 2 of which had been dissolved in the past year. His property development business had exactly 1 project, listed a small apartment building in Riverside that was currently in foreclosure proceedings. Interesting, reposting. She also discovered that Alistair had been married once before to a woman named Rosalind Sterling, who'd owned a successful catering business in San Diego. The business had been sold suddenly 2 years ago, right around the time their divorce was finalized. Even more interesting, but the most compelling discovery, was a small article in a Riverside newspaper about a lawsuit filed by elderly homeowners. They claimed they'd been pressured into selling their properties below market value to an investment company that promised to handle all the details and pay them monthly proceeds that never materialized. The company was called Vance Holdings, LLC. By the time Evelyn and Alistair returned from their town exploration, laden with shopping bags from expensive boutiques, Sierra had a much clearer picture of what they were really doing here. And she had a plan. "How was your day?" Sierra asked, a serene smile playing on her lips. "Wonderful," Evelyn said, dropping packages onto Sierra's coffee table. "We found this amazing real estate office in town. The agent said properties like this one are incredibly sought after." She mentioned that similar houses have sold for well above asking price recently. "Really?" Alistair nodded enthusiastically. "The market is exceptionally strong right now for coastal properties. It might be the perfect time to make a move if you were considering it." "You know, I've been thinking about what you both said," Sierra replied, watching them exchange a quick look of triumph. "That's wonderful, Mother. I knew you'd see the logic in it." "Yes, the logic is quite clear." Sierra smiled at Alistair. "And I've been thinking about your breakfast requirements too. 5 a.m. is quite early." "I know it's an imposition," Alistair said, though his tone suggested he found it no imposition at all. "But I really do function better with a proper start to the day." "Of course you do. I completely understand." Sierra looked directly at him, noting the way he was already relaxing into what he thought was victory. "I'll make sure everything is ready for you tomorrow morning. Something special." "You're the best," Mother Evelyn said, kissing Sierra's cheek like they had just concluded a business deal rather than discussing Sierra's role as their unpaid household staff. That evening, Sierra served them dinner on her good china and listened as they discussed their plans for maximizing the property's potential as if she weren't sitting right there. They talked about removing walls, updating fixtures, and creating multiple revenue streams through vacation rentals. They were carving up her home like it was already theirs. After they went upstairs, Sierra cleaned the kitchen, then sat on her deck with a glass of wine, listening to the waves and planning tomorrow's breakfast surprise. Alistair wanted everything his way, and Alistair was an early riser who valued his routine. Perfect. She was going to give him exactly what he'd asked for. At 4 a.m., Sierra's alarm went off, just as she'd promised. But Alistair and Evelyn had no idea what they'd actually requested when they'd turned Sierra into their personal breakfast chef. Sierra moved quietly through her dark kitchen muscle memory, guiding her as she prepared what would definitely be the most memorable meal of Alistair's life. The sunrise was still 2 hours away, but Sierra was wide awake and absolutely focused on the task at hand. Coffee first. Alistair liked it strong, no sugar. Sierra ground the beans fresh, just the way he'd specified, and added her own special ingredient, a hefty dose of cinicides, the active component in natural laxative tablets. Enough to turn his digestive system into a ticking time bomb, but not enough to actually harm him. Just enough to make his day extremely uncomfortable. While the coffee brewed, Sierra prepared his eggs Benedict. She'd been cooking for 34 years, so creating a picture-perfect breakfast wasn't challenging. What was challenging was deciding exactly how much additional seasoning to add to ensure Alistair's morning would be as memorable as hers was about to be. She'd crushed up 3 more laxative tablets and mixed them into the hollandaise sauce. The beauty of hollandaise was that it already had such a complex flavor that a little extra bitterness would be completely masked by the lemon and butter. For Evelyn's breakfast, Sierra prepared regular scrambled eggs and toast. Evelyn hadn't made demands about timing or service, so she'd get exactly what she'd always gotten from Sierra, the bare minimum effort required to avoid being accused of being an unloving mother. At exactly 4:47 a.m., Sierra heard movement upstairs. Alistair's internal clock was apparently as precise as his demands. Sierra arranged his breakfast beautifully on her best plates and waited. Mrs. Finch Alistair appeared in the kitchen wearing an expensive silk robe and looking surprised to see everything ready. "You actually did this. You said 5 a.m. I aim to please." Sierra poured his specially prepared coffee into her finest china cup. "This smells fantastic. You really didn't have to go to all this trouble." "No trouble at all." Sierra watched him take his first sip and smiled. "I believe in giving people exactly what they ask for." Alistair ate with the enthusiasm of someone who'd grown accustomed to having his needs anticipated and met without question. He complimented the eggs, praised the coffee, and told Sierra how much he appreciated having someone who understood the importance of routine. "You're quite the hostess," he said, finishing his last bite. "Evelyn was right when she said you had a gift for this." "I have many gifts," Sierra replied. "Some of them take longer to reveal themselves than others." Evelyn eventually wandered downstairs in her pajamas, looking like she'd expected to find Sierra already cleaning up after her husband's breakfast. "Oh, good. You actually did it," she said, as if there had been some question about whether Sierra would follow through on their ridiculous request. "Of course I did it. I always do what I say I'm going to do. This is exactly what I was talking about yesterday." Evelyn continued helping herself to coffee. "You're so good at taking care of people. It's really what makes you happy. Taking care of people as opposed to having her own life, her own interests, her own schedule." According to her daughter, Sierra's highest calling was serving breakfast to her husband at dawn. "I live to serve," Sierra said, and neither of them caught the sarcasm. Alistair excused himself to take a shower and get ready for his morning calls. Sierra cleaned up the kitchen while Evelyn sat at the counter scrolling through her phone, occasionally making comments about how nice it was to have a proper breakfast ready without having to think about it. "Alistair is really impressed with you," she said eventually. "He said you remind him of his grandmother, who always had everything organized and ready." His grandmother? Sierra was 52 years old, and her daughter's husband was comparing her to his deceased grandmother. How flattering. "I think this arrangement could really work out for everyone," Evelyn continued. "You get to feel useful and needed. We get to enjoy some quality family time, and Alistair gets the kind of environment that helps him be productive. Quality family time where Sierra provided free meal service while they discussed selling her house." About 45 minutes after breakfast, Sierra heard the first signs that her special recipe was taking effect. Alistair's voice drifted down from upstairs, calling Evelyn's name with what sounded like urgency. "Evelyn, where's the bathroom?" "Upstairs hall, first door on the right." She called back, not looking up from her phone. "I found it." "But is there another one?" Sierra continued wiping down counters that were already clean, hiding her smile. "Mother, do you have any stomach medication?" Alistair's voice came from the top of the stairs, sounding considerably less confident than it had during breakfast. In the medicine cabinet, Sierra called back. "Are you feeling unwell?" "Just a little stomach upset." Probably something I ate yesterday. Evelyn finally looked concerned. Alistair, are you okay? I'm sure it's fine. Just could you maybe postpone that 9 a.m. call? I might need a few more minutes. Over the next hour, Alistair made 6 trips to the bathroom. By the 3rd trip, he was walking much faster. By the 5th, he was practically running. I don't understand what's wrong with him, Evelyn said, pacing around Sierra's kitchen. He never gets sick. Food poisoning can be very sudden, Sierra said sympathetically. Maybe something from that restaurant you went to yesterday. But I ate the same things he did, and I feel fine. Everyone reacts differently to bacteria. Alistair appeared in the doorway, pale and sweating. Evelyn, I need you to call Dr. Thorne. Something is seriously wrong. Should I take you to the hospital? Evelyn was starting to panic, which was almost as satisfying as watching Alistair's discomfort. Let's see how you feel after it works its way through your system, Sierra suggested helpfully. Sometimes these things just need time. Mrs. Finch, I hate to ask, but do you have any bismuth subsalicylate or loperamide, anything? I'll check. Sierra made a show of looking through her medicine cabinet and returned with a bottle of antacids that would do absolutely nothing for his current problem. This might help. Alistair swallowed 4 tablets and retreated upstairs again. For the rest of the morning, the only sounds in Sierra's house were his footsteps rushing between the bedroom and bathroom, punctuated by Evelyn's concerned questions and his increasingly strained responses. By lunchtime, he was too weak to come downstairs. Mother, I think we should take him to urgent care, Evelyn said. He's been sick for hours. If you think that's best. Sierra agreed. Though sometimes these stomach bugs just have to run their course. This isn't a stomach bug. This is serious. Sierra looked at her daughter with all the concern she could muster. You're probably right. Food poisoning can be dangerous if it gets too severe. As they prepared to leave for the medical centre, Alistair managed to make it downstairs, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past 4 hours. Mrs. Finch, I'm so sorry about this, he said weakly. I don't know what happened. These things are unpredictable, Sierra said. I do hope you feel better soon. We might be a while at the doctor, Evelyn said, helping Alistair to the car. Don't wait up for us. Sierra watched them drive away. Alistair hunched over in the passenger seat, like he was afraid to move too suddenly. Then she went back to her kitchen and disposed of the rest of the crushed laxatives she'd hidden in the spice cabinet. Tomorrow morning, Alistair would probably be feeling much better, but Sierra doubted he'd be quite so enthusiastic about requesting breakfast at 5 a.m., and this was just the beginning of what she had planned for her unexpected houseguests. Alistair spent 3 hours at urgent care, only to be told he had a severe case of food poisoning and needed to stay hydrated and rest. When they returned that afternoon, he looked like a man who'd been through a war and lost. The doctor said it was probably something he ate yesterday, Evelyn announced as she helped Alistair up the stairs. He needs to stick to bland foods for the next few days. How terrible, Sierra said, following them with a pitcher of ice water. I feel so guilty. What if it was something I served this morning? No, Mother. The doctor said the timing doesn't match. Food poisoning from breakfast would have started much sooner. Alistair collapsed onto the guest bed, like his legs couldn't support him anymore. Mrs. Finch, I'm so sorry about this, he groaned. Oh, sorry. I know we've disrupted your routine. Don't you worry about anything, Sierra said, arranging pillows behind his back. Your only job is to get better. For the rest of the day, Alistair stayed in bed while Evelyn played nursemaid, bringing him sips of ginger ale and checking his temperature every hour. Sierra made a simple chicken broth for dinner and served it to him on a tray, playing the concerned hostess to perfection. You're so kind, Alistair said weakly. I don't know what we would have done if we were staying at a hotel. That's what family is for. Sierra replied, noting how quickly he'd accepted the family designation when he needed care. That evening, while Alistair slept fitfully upstairs, Evelyn and Sierra sat on the deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and violet. I'm worried about him, Evelyn said, her voice soft. He never gets sick. He has this whole health routine. Takes supplements, exercises every day. Sometimes our bodies surprise us, Sierra said, sipping her wine. Stress can lower immunity. Stress, well, starting a new marriage, traveling, making big life decisions, that can all take a toll. Evelyn looked at Sierra sideways, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. What big life decisions? Your suggestion about me selling this house, that's a major financial decision. I'm sure Alistair feels responsible for helping me make the right choice. Sierra watched her daughter, waiting for the familiar wheels of self-interest to turn. Oh? Evelyn mused, a new thought dawning. Actually, we were planning to talk to you more about that. Alistair has some concrete proposals he wanted to present. I'm sure he does, Sierra said, her voice smooth, almost purring. He really knows what he's talking about, Mother. He's helped other people in similar situations. Similar situations like the elderly homeowners who needed guidance from a young man with expensive taste and failing businesses. I'd be very interested to hear his proposals, Sierra said, a gentle smile on her lips. When he's feeling better, of course. The tang of salt air filled her lungs, a grounding sensation, as the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery streaks. Sierra felt a quiet resolve solidify within her. Alistair Vance thought he was moving pieces on a chessboard, but he had just stumbled onto a game far older and more intricate than he could ever comprehend. The next morning, Alistair emerged from the guest room, looking significantly improved but still cautious. He'd apparently spent the night afraid to eat anything substantial, which meant Sierra's laxative surprise had done exactly what she'd intended. The previous night's drama had seemingly reset his appetite, replacing his usual confidence with a tentative apprehension. "How are you feeling?" Sierra asked as he tentatively sipped the herbal tea she'd prepared, a simple chamomile brew untouched by any special ingredients. "Much better, thank you," he replied, his voice still a little raspy. "I think the worst is over. I'm so glad. There's nothing worse than being sick away from home." Sierra's tone was genuinely sympathetic, a practiced performance honed over decades of mothering. Alistair nodded, then looked around the kitchen with what Sierra was beginning to recognize as his appraising expression. The casual concern for her health had faded, replaced by the familiar glint of a hunter scenting prey. "Mrs. Finch, I hope we can continue the conversation we started a few days ago about your living situation." "Of course," Sierra said, her voice soft and amenable. "I've been thinking about what you said." His eyes lit up a subtle but unmistakable spark of triumph. "Really? Really? In fact, your illness yesterday made me realize how isolated I am out here. If something serious happened to me, no one would know." She let a touch of vulnerability creep into her voice, a perfectly placed feint. Evelyn appeared in the doorway, still in her robe, a smug satisfaction spreading across her face. "See, Mother? That's exactly what we've been trying to tell you. Yes, you've been very persuasive." Sierra poured Alistair more tea, watching him carefully for any signs that he was planning to make breakfast demands again. He merely sipped, his gaze fixed on her. "Alistair, you mentioned you had experience helping other people with their property decisions." "Absolutely. It's actually a specialty of mine. Helping seniors transition from large properties they can no longer maintain to more appropriate living situations." Seniors. Sierra was 52, and he was talking about her like she was ready for assisted living. The condescension was almost palpable, yet she maintained her placid smile. "And you handle all the financial details, everything. The property assessment, market analysis, sale, negotiations, investment strategy for the proceeds. My clients don't have to worry about any of the complicated aspects." "Your clients?" Sierra repeated, a hint of curiosity in her voice. "How many people have you helped with this kind of transition?" Alistair exchanged a quick glance with Evelyn, a subtle communication Sierra absorbed. "Several. In fact, I just completed a successful transition for a lovely elderly woman in Riverside who was struggling to maintain her family home. The lovely elderly woman, whose house was now in foreclosure proceedings, Sierra silently amended. "That sounds perfect," Sierra said, her gaze unwavering. "I'd love to hear more details about how the process works." "Well, first, we'd need to do a proper assessment of the property value. Then we'd look at your current financial situation, debts, expenses, that sort of thing. After that, I can present you with several options for maximizing your return on investment, and you'd handle the sale directly through my company. Yes, it's much more efficient than dealing with traditional real estate agents who don't understand the unique needs of senior property owners." Sierra nodded thoughtfully, a picture of rapt attention. "It sounds like you've put a lot of thought into this." "I have. I can see how much stress this kind of decision would create for someone in your position. Having professional guidance makes all the difference. Someone in my position, a helpless middle-aged woman who needed a young man to swoop in and solve her problems." Alistair, Sierra said, leaning forward with what she hoped looked like genuine interest. "Would it be possible to see some documentation of your previous work? Success stories, client testimonials, that sort of thing." "Of course. I have a complete portfolio back in Riverside. I could have my assistant email you some examples." "That would be wonderful." For the next hour, Alistair laid out his vision for Sierra's future. She would sell the house to his investment company for what he called a fair market price, which would, of course, be determined by his assessment. The proceeds would be invested in a portfolio he would manage, providing her with monthly income while the principal grew over time. She would move to a small condo in a senior community where she wouldn't have to worry about maintenance or security. Alistair would handle all the financial details for a modest management fee. It was a beautiful plan for Alistair. "This all sounds very professional," Sierra said when he finished his presentation. "I'm impressed by how thoroughly you've thought this through." "I believe in being prepared," Alistair said, beaming. "The real estate market can be volatile, so timing is crucial. And you think now is the right time?" "Absolutely. The market is strong, interest rates are favorable. And frankly, Mrs. Finch, you're at the perfect age to make this transition before you're forced to by circumstances. Forced to by circumstances like a health crisis or financial emergency that would leave her vulnerable to exactly the kind of pressure he was applying right now." "I appreciate your concern for my welfare," Sierra said, her voice warm. "It's touching to see how much you care about my future security." Alistair beamed, apparently convinced that he'd successfully manipulated a lonely middle-aged woman into handing over her most valuable asset. But Alistair had no idea that while he was recovering from his mystery illness yesterday, Sierra had been making some phone calls of her own. To Eleanor Patterson, the elderly woman in Riverside whose house he'd helped her sell. To Rosalind Sterling, his ex-wife in San Diego. And to a very interesting private investigator named Barnaby Shaw, who specialized in real estate fraud. Alistair thought he was closing in on his next victim. What he didn't realize was that Sierra had been setting a trap and he was about to walk right into it. "Alistair," Sierra said, standing up from the kitchen table. "I think I'm ready to move forward with your proposal." The look of triumph that flashed across Alistair's face was almost worth the week of listening to him treat her house like his personal resort. "That's wonderful news, Mrs. Finch," he said, already reaching for his phone. "I can have my team start the assessment process as early as tomorrow." "Actually," Sierra said, raising a hand to stop him, her voice still mild. "I'd like to invite some other people to be part of this decision. You know how complicated financial matters can be for someone my age." Alistair's smile faltered slightly. "Other people? Well, my attorney for one, and my financial advisor. I'm sure you understand. A decision this significant requires proper legal review." Evelyn looked confused. "Mother, I didn't know you had a financial advisor." "Oh yes, Harold Manning. He's been managing my investments since the divorce. Very conservative approach, but he's kept me quite comfortable." Sierra smiled at Alistair. I'm sure you two will have a lot to discuss about investment strategies. Alistair was nodding, but Sierra could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. The presence of actual financial professionals would complicate his carefully crafted sales pitch. Of course, he said, forcing a smile. I always recommend that my clients get independent verification of any proposals. It's just good business practice. I knew you'd understand. Oh, and I've also invited Rosalind Sterling to join us. The colour drained from Alistair's face so quickly, Sierra thought he might faint. Rosalind Sterling. Yes, your ex-wife. Such a sweet woman. We had the most interesting conversation yesterday while you were recovering. Evelyn looked back and forth between them, a dawning horror creeping into her expression. Alistair. You talked to his ex-wife mother. Why would you do that? Just doing my due diligence, Sierra said cheerfully, the placid mask never slipping. When someone is offering to help me manage my financial future, I like to understand their background thoroughly. Alistair had gone completely silent, staring at Sierra like she'd just pulled a gun on him. Rosalind had such fascinating stories about your business practices. Sierra continued, her voice light and conversational, especially regarding her catering company, the one that was sold so suddenly right before your divorce. Mrs. Finch, Alistair said carefully, his voice strained. I think there may have been some misunderstandings in whatever conversation you had with my ex-wife. Oh, I don't think so. She was very clear about how you convinced her to put her business up as collateral for some property investments that didn't work out quite as planned. Evelyn was looking increasingly alarmed. Alistair, what is she talking about? It's complicated, honey. Rosalind and I had some business disagreements during our marriage. She's still bitter about the divorce. Is she bitter about the bankruptcy too? Sierra asked, her voice losing its feigned sweetness, becoming sharp as cut glass. Or just about losing her life's work to cover your failed real estate ventures? Alistair stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against Sierra's kitchen floor with an ear-splitting shriek. I think there's been a serious miscommunication here. I don't think so at all. In fact, I think the communication has been perfectly clear. Sierra looked directly at him, her gaze unwavering. You've been very transparent about your intentions, Alistair. You want to help me sell my house to your investment company, manage the proceeds through your financial services, and move me into a situation where I'm completely dependent on your expertise. That's not how I would characterize it. How would you characterize it? I'm trying to help you make a smart financial transition, the same way you helped Eleanor Patterson in Riverside. This time, Alistair actually stepped backward. How do you know about Eleanor? Oh, we've become quite friendly. She's very interested in meeting you again, actually. Something about wanting to discuss why her monthly payments stopped coming and why her house is now in foreclosure proceedings. Evelyn was staring at her husband with growing horror, her face draining of colour. Alistair, what the hell is going on? Evelyn. Your mother has been listening to lies from people who don't understand legitimate business practices. Legitimate business practices? Sierra repeated, a cold amusement in her voice. Is that what you call convincing elderly homeowners to sell their properties below market value to your investment company, then failing to provide the promised monthly payments? Those are complicated financial instruments. Sometimes market conditions, sometimes con artists get caught. Sierra interrupted, her voice gaining strength, and sometimes their new wives discover that they've married a fraud. Alistair's mask of charm was completely gone, now replaced by the cold calculation Sierra had suspected was underneath all along. His jaw was tight, his eyes narrowed slits of pure malice. You have no idea what you're talking about, he snarled. And you have no proof of anything inappropriate. Actually, I have quite a bit of proof. Harold Manning. My financial advisor is also a forensic accountant. He's been very interested in reviewing the financial records for Vance Holdings LLC. Alistair went completely still. You don't have access to those records. No, but the state of California does, especially when multiple complaints have been filed about fraudulent business practices. Sierra walked to her kitchen counter and picked up a manila folder she'd placed there that morning. The crisp paper rustled softly, a sound of doom in the sudden silence. "Would you like to see the complaint I filed yesterday with the State Attorney General's office?" You did what Alistair's voice was a guttural whisper. Filed a detailed complaint about a pattern of elder fraud targeting homeowners along the coast. I included Eleanor Patterson's documentation, Rosalind's testimony about your business practices, and a fascinating analysis of how your investment schemes actually work. Evelyn sank into her chair, her eyes wide with shock. "Mother, are you saying Alistair is some kind of criminal?" "I'm saying Alistair is a con artist who specializes in targeting women he thinks are vulnerable and isolated." Sierra opened the folder and pulled out several documents, spreading them across the table. Women like his ex-wife who trusted him with her business. Women like Eleanor Patterson who thought she was making a smart financial decision. Women like me, who he assumed would be grateful for male guidance and financial protection. Alistair was edging toward the kitchen door, his movements tense and furtive, but Sierra wasn't finished. "The beautiful part of your plan, Alistair, was how you used my own daughter to get close to me. Marry the woman with access to the target, convince her that she's helping her mother, and exploit the family relationship to bypass normal suspicion. Evelyn, we need to leave now." Alistair hissed, his gaze fixed on the door. But Evelyn was staring at him, a dawning realization twisting her features. "The quick wedding. You wanted to get married before meeting my mother. You said it was romantic, but you were establishing legal cover. Evelyn, don't listen to her. She's a paranoid old woman who's been—" "I'm 52, Alistair." Sierra interrupted, her voice now calm, authoritative, stripped of any pretense. "Not old, not paranoid, and definitely not helpless." She stood holding the folder like a shield. "I'm also not someone who can be intimidated by a failed real estate developer with a pattern of defrauding women." Alistair made a break for the door, but Sierra wasn't trying to stop him. She wanted him to run. "The California State Police will be very interested in your travel patterns," she called after him, her voice ringing clear. "Especially since you're now officially under investigation for elder fraud." He turned back for a moment, his handsome face twisted with pure, unadulterated rage. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually, Alistair, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. The question is whether you know who you tried to con." As Alistair rushed upstairs to pack slamming drawers and shouting into his phone, Evelyn remained sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the documents Sierra had spread in front of her. "Mother," she said quietly, her voice small and brittle. "Did I really bring a criminal into your house? You brought someone who saw you as a tool to get access to me and my property. The criminal part was just his method. I thought he loved me. He might have. But he loved the idea of my real estate more. What happens now?" Evelyn's question was barely a whisper. Sierra looked at her daughter. This woman who'd spent the past week treating her like hired help, while her husband plotted to steal Sierra's home. Now you decide whether you're going to be part of the solution or part of the problem. Upstairs, the sounds of Alistair's frantic packing continued, punctuated by the frantic staccato of his voice on the phone. He was probably calling a lawyer or maybe warning other potential victims, but it was too late for Alistair. The trap had been set, and he'd walked into it completely. The only question now was what Evelyn was going to do when she realized her week-old marriage was about to become evidence in a federal fraud investigation. Alistair was gone within 20 minutes, speeding away in their rental car like the house was on fire, which, from his perspective, it probably was. What he left behind was Evelyn sitting at Sierra's kitchen table, staring at the evidence of her husband's criminal activities, and about 15 missed calls on his abandoned phone. "Mother," Evelyn said finally, her voice small and defeated. "How long have you known? I suspected something was wrong the moment you both showed up here talking about my living situation, but I didn't have proof until yesterday." Sierra sat down across from her, noting how young Evelyn looked, without Alistair's confidence propping her up. The question is, how much did you know? Nothing, Evelyn said quickly, her head shaking emphatically. I swear, Mother. I thought he was legitimate. He showed me financial documents, client testimonials. Everything looked professional. Did it occur to you to wonder why a successful investment consultant would be so interested in marrying someone he'd known for 6 months? A woman with no assets of her own. Evelyn's face crumpled. I thought he loved me. He was so charming, so attentive. He made me feel special. You are special, sweetheart. But Alistair wasn't interested in special. He was interested in access. Alistair's abandoned phone buzzed again. Sierra glanced at the screen and saw a name that made her blood run cold. Eleanor Patterson. Evelyn, I need to answer this call. Sierra pressed the speaker icon. Mrs. Vance. Eleanor Patterson's voice was shaky and frightened. I've been trying to reach Alistair all morning. The bank called again about the foreclosure proceedings, and I don't understand what's happening. Mrs. Patterson. This is Sierra Finch, Alistair's mother-in-law. I'm afraid Alistair isn't available right now. Oh, well, maybe you can help me. I gave Alistair all my legal documents when he bought my house, but now the bank is saying I still owe money on a mortgage that was supposed to be paid off. Alistair promised me monthly payments, but they stopped coming 3 months ago. Sierra felt sick, listening to Eleanor's confusion and fear. This woman had trusted Alistair with her home and her financial security, and he'd left her facing homelessness. Mrs. Patterson, I'm going to give you some phone numbers. There are people who can help you, but you need to contact them today. After Sierra finished giving Eleanor the contact information for the State Attorney General's Elder Fraud Division and a non-profit legal aid organization, she hung up and looked at her daughter. That's what your husband does, Evelyn. He preys on older women who trust him. But I'm not older, and I don't have any assets he could steal. No, but you have something even more valuable. You have me. Evelyn was quiet for a long time, processing the crushing reality of her situation. She was legally married to a man who was about to be charged with multiple counts of fraud. Even if she hadn't participated in his schemes, her association with him would complicate her life for years. What do I do now? She asked, her voice barely audible. You make a choice. You can contact Alistair, warn him about the investigation, and try to help him avoid prosecution, or you can cooperate with the authorities and try to minimize the damage to your own life. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple. Sierra reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. Alistair is a criminal, Evelyn. The only question is whether you're going to be his accomplice or his victim. That afternoon, Detective Sarah Chen from the California State Police Financial Crimes Division arrived at Sierra's house. She carried a briefcase full of documentation and wore an expression of keen interest. Mrs. Finch, she said, settling into Sierra's living room with the authority of someone used to dealing with financial predators. The complaint you filed has opened up a much larger investigation than we initially expected. How much larger? Alistair Vance appears to have been operating this scheme in multiple states over the past 5 years. We've identified at least 12 victims, mostly women over 60, who owned valuable real estate. 12 women, Sierra repeated, thinking about Eleanor Patterson's frightened voice on the phone. Possibly more. The pattern is always the same. He identifies vulnerable targets, usually through personal connections or dating relationships, gains their trust, convinces them to sign over property management to his company, and then systematically drains their assets. Evelyn, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, finally spoke up. Her voice trembling, "Detective, what's going to happen to me?" "I married him, but I didn't know about any of this." Detective Chen studied her carefully. "That depends on several factors. How much you knew when you knew it, and whether you're willing to cooperate with our investigation." "I'll cooperate," Evelyn said immediately, her voice firming with resolve. "I'll tell you everything I know." "Good. We'll need detailed statements about your relationship with Mr. Vance, his business activities, his associates, and any conversations you had about his work. For the next 3 hours, Detective Chen interviewed both of them. Evelyn provided information about Alistair's business, contacts, his travel patterns, and his methods for researching potential targets. Sierra shared everything she'd discovered about his previous victims and his attempts to manipulate her. Mrs. Finch, Detective Chen said, as she prepared to leave, snapping her briefcase shut. You may have prevented him from adding several more victims to his list. Most people don't think to investigate someone their family member brings home. Most people don't have daughters who show up demanding breakfast service at 5 a.m. Sierra replied, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. After the detective left, Evelyn and Sierra sat on the deck watching the sunset. Both were emotionally exhausted from the day's revelations. Mother, I owe you an enormous apology, Evelyn said finally. Her voice choked with emotion. For bringing him here, for the way we treated you, for everything. You owe me more than an apology, Evelyn. You owe me an explanation of how you could watch your husband treat me like hired help and think that was acceptable. I know. I was so caught up in feeling important in being married to someone successful that I lost sight of what was right. You've always had a tendency to get caught up in appearances, Sierra said softly. But this time, your poor judgment brought a predator into my home. How do I make this right? Evelyn looked at Sierra, her eyes brimming with a vulnerability Sierra hadn't seen in years. This woman who'd spent her entire adult life making impulsive decisions and expecting other people to clean up the consequences was finally facing the music. You start by taking responsibility for your choices and their impact on other people, and then you figure out who you want to be when you're not trying to impress someone who was using you. That evening, Alistair finally called. Not Sierra's number, but Evelyn's. Evelyn looked at Sierra before answering, and Sierra nodded. Put it on speaker, she said. Evelyn. Thank God, Alistair's voice was tight with panic crackling through the phone. Are you okay? Where are you? I'm still at my mother's house, Alistair. Where are you? I'm in Nevada. Listen, baby. Your mother has been telling lies about me to the police. She's trying to cause problems for us. What kind of problems, Alistair? Evelyn's voice was calmer than Sierra expected. She filed some kind of false complaint, claiming I defrauded people. It's completely fabricated, but I need to stay away until my lawyer can sort it out, Alistair, Evelyn said carefully, her gaze meeting Sierra's. I talked to Eleanor Patterson today, silence thick and heavy. Alistair, she told me about her house, about the missing payments. She told me about the foreclosure. Evelyn. That's a complicated business situation. There were market conditions that, Alistair, Sierra said, leaning toward the phone, her voice cold and clear. This is Sierra. I think you should know that your wife has decided to cooperate with the police investigation. Evelyn, don't listen to her. She's a vindictive old woman who's trying to destroy our marriage. Our marriage destroyed itself when you used it to commit fraud, Evelyn replied. And Sierra felt a surge of pride at the unexpected strength in her daughter's voice. Evelyn, please. I love you. We can work through this. No. Alistair, we can't. Evelyn's thumb hovered over the phone screen, then pressed firmly. The line went dead. That felt good, she said, surprising both of them. Good. It should. As they prepared for bed that night, Evelyn helped Sierra secure all the doors and windows. Alistair was desperate now, and desperate people make unpredictable choices. But Sierra wasn't worried. Alistair had spent a week thinking he was manipulating a helpless middle-aged woman. He had no idea that this helpless middle-aged woman had been 3 steps ahead of him from the beginning. Tomorrow he'd discover just how far ahead Sierra had been. Alistair's second mistake was underestimating how thoroughly Sierra had documented every aspect of his stay at her house. His first mistake was trying to con her in the first place, but he wouldn't fully understand that until much later. The next morning, while Evelyn slept in, Sierra was on a conference call. Detective Chen was on the line along with Harold Manning, her forensic accountant, and Rosalind Sterling Allister's ex-wife, who had flown in from San Diego specifically to testify against him. Sierra, Rosalind said through the speaker, her voice tinged with both relief and bitterness. The evidence you've gathered is extraordinary. I wish I'd had someone like you watching out for me when Allister was destroying my business. What exactly did he do to your catering company? Sierra asked, though she already suspected the answer. The same thing he tried to do to you. He convinced me to use the business as collateral for what he called a sure thing real estate investment. When the investment failed, because it was designed to fail, I lost everything. Harold Manning, who had been reviewing financial documents while they talked, cleared his throat. Mrs. Sterling, the pattern we're seeing suggests that Allister's investment failures weren't accidental. He was systematically moving assets from his victims' accounts into offshore holdings that he controlled. You mean he was stealing money on purpose? Rosalind's voice was incredulous. I mean, he was running a sophisticated embezzlement operation disguised as legitimate investment services. Detective Chen's voice was grim. We've traced similar patterns with all 12 of his known victims. The good news is that we now have enough evidence to issue federal charges. The bad news is that most of the stolen money has been moved beyond our immediate reach. What about Allister's current location? Sierra asked, a prickle of anticipation in her chest. We have people watching the Nevada border, and his credit cards are being monitored. He can't stay hidden indefinitely. After the call ended, Evelyn came downstairs looking like she hadn't slept much. News. Your husband is officially a federal fugitive, Sierra said, pouring her coffee. The FBI issued a warrant this morning, so it's really over. Evelyn sounded numb. The criminal part is just beginning. Allister will be court prosecuted and hopefully sent to prison. But the personal part, dealing with being married to a con artist, that's going to take time. Mother, can I ask you something? Of course. When did you know for certain that Allister was a fraud? Sierra thought about that question while scrambling eggs for their breakfast. Honestly, the moment he suggested I needed help managing my own life. Men like Allister always reveal themselves by assuming women are helpless, but I fell for it completely. You fell for the charm. That's different. Sierra plated her eggs and sat down across from Evelyn. Allister is very good at making people feel special, important, needed. It's not stupidity to want those things. Then why didn't you fall for it? Because I've spent the past 5 years learning to live with only my own opinion of myself. When someone shows up telling me I need their guidance, my first instinct is suspicion, not gratitude. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, processing this. I've never lived alone. I've always had roommates or boyfriends or someone else making decisions with me, which is exactly what Allister was counting on. That afternoon, Sierra's peaceful morning was interrupted by the familiar crunch of tires on her driveway. But it wasn't Allister returning. It was a black sedan with government plates, Mrs. Finch. A tall man in a dark suit approached Sierra's front door. I'm Agent Martinez with the FBI Financial Crimes Task Force. We need to talk to you about Allister Vance. Agent Martinez was accompanied by a woman who introduced herself as Agent Kim, and they both had the serious demeanor of people who dealt with high-stakes financial crimes. They settled into Sierra's living room, Agent Martinez setting a digital recorder on the coffee table. Allister contacted you last night, correct? Agent Martinez asked, his voice calm and professional. He called my daughter's phone. We have the conversation recorded if you need it. Agent Kim leaned forward. Actually, we'd like you to consider making another call to him. What kind of call? Sierra's senses sharpened every nerve alert. Allister is increasingly desperate. His offshore accounts have been frozen. His known associates are under surveillance, and he's running out of resources. We think he might try to return here to retrieve something he left behind. He left behind a cell phone and some clothes, Sierra said, frowning. Nothing valuable. Are you sure? Agent Martinez pulled out a tablet and showed Sierra a photo. Does this look familiar? It was a picture of Sierra's guest bedroom, but focused on a corner she hadn't paid much attention to. Behind the decorative plant near the window, something small and metallic was visible. "What is that?" Sierra asked, a cold dread creeping into her stomach. "We believe it's a portable hard drive containing financial records and client information for his entire operation. If we're right, that device contains evidence of crimes in multiple states and possibly internationally." Sierra stared at the photo. Alistair had hidden evidence of his fraud ring in her own house. "We need to recover that drive. But if we simply raid your property, Alistair will know we found it. We'd prefer to let him come back for it himself." "You want to use my house as bait?" The words left Sierra's mouth with a dry, bitter taste. "We want to give Alistair an opportunity to incriminate himself further while attempting to destroy evidence." Evelyn, who had been listening from the kitchen doorway, stepped forward, her face pale. "Agents, my mother has already done enough to help with this investigation. Asking her to put herself in danger is unreasonable." Mrs. Vance, Agent Kim, said, her gaze sympathetic but firm. "Alistair is facing federal charges that could put him in prison for 20 years. He's desperate enough to do anything to avoid prosecution. Whether we set a trap or not, he may come back here anyway. But if we set a trap," Sierra said slowly, a steel resolve hardening within her, "you'll be ready for him." "Exactly." Sierra looked at the photo again, thinking about Eleanor Patterson's frightened voice on the phone and Rosalind Sterling's destroyed business. Alistair had spent years systematically destroying women's lives for profit. What would I need to do? Agent Martinez outlined their plan. Sierra would call Alistair and tell him that Evelyn had left, that Sierra was alone and frightened, and that she wanted to make a deal. She would suggest that if he returned quietly to collect his belongings, she would consider not cooperating further with the police investigation. "He'll be suspicious," Agent Kim warned. "Alistair is smart, and he knows you've already filed complaints against him." "But he's also arrogant," Sierra replied, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. "And arrogant men often believe they can talk their way out of situations that would terrify normal people." "There's one more thing," Agent Martinez said. "We'll need you to wear a wire during any conversation with Alistair, and you'll need to follow our instructions exactly. No improvisation, no attempts to confront him yourself." Sierra thought about this for a moment. A week ago, she'd been enjoying peaceful mornings on her deck, reading books and painting watercolors. Now federal agents were asking her to help capture a fugitive in her own home. "When do we make the call?" she asked. That evening, with FBI agents positioned discreetly around her property and sophisticated recording equipment hidden throughout her house. Sierra dialed Alistair's number. "Sierra?" He sounded surprised and wary, his voice tinny through the speaker. "Alistair. I'm glad you answered. I need to talk to you. Where's Evelyn?" "She left this morning. She's furious with both of us and doesn't want anything to do with this situation." Sierra infused her voice with a carefully calibrated blend of fear and desperation. "What kind of situation?" "The police keep calling me, asking me questions about you, about your business." "Alistair, I'm scared. I don't understand what's happening." Sierra could hear the calculation in his silence as he processed this information. "Sierra, I know this is confusing for you, but the police are exaggerating everything because they're under pressure to make arrests. But Eleanor Patterson, the woman whose house, Eleanor Patterson is a confused elderly woman who doesn't understand complex financial instruments. The police are using her confusion to build a case that doesn't exist." Even knowing Alistair was lying, Sierra was impressed by his ability to sound completely sincere. "Alistair, I just want this to end. I don't want to be involved in a court case or a prosecution. I just want my quiet life back." "I want that too, Sierra. And I think we can make that happen." "How?" "I need to come back to the house to collect some things I left behind. Personal items that belong to me. If I can retrieve those items and leave quietly, this whole misunderstanding can be resolved." "When?" "Tonight, late after the police surveillance teams change shifts. Can you make sure all the doors are unlocked?" As Sierra hung up the phone, Agent Martinez nodded approvingly. "Perfect. He'll be here within 2 hours. And then Alistair Vance's criminal career comes to an end. But Sierra had the feeling that Alistair's visit tonight was going to reveal more than just his desperation to escape justice. Men like Alistair always had backup plans, and Sierra suspected they were about to discover what his really was. Alistair arrived at 2:47 a.m., and from Sierra's position at the upstairs window, she watched him approach her house like a predator, returning to familiar hunting grounds. He didn't look like a desperate fugitive. He looked confident, purposeful, like a man who still believed he controlled the situation. The FBI had positioned Sierra in her bedroom with Agent Kim, while Agent Martinez and 2 other agents waited in concealed positions downstairs. Sierra's job was simple: let Alistair retrieve what he came for, while the agents recorded everything. But watching Alistair move through her garden with that predatory confidence, Sierra realized the FBI didn't fully understand who they were dealing with. Alistair wasn't just a con artist who'd made some mistakes. He was a career criminal who'd spent years perfecting his methods. "He's coming to the front door," Agent Kim whispered into her radio, her voice tight with anticipation. Sierra heard Alistair's key in the lock. The spare key Evelyn had given him during their first day here. He'd kept it when he fled, which meant he'd always planned to return. Sierra Alistair's voice drifted up from her living room, a low, unnerving call. "Sierra, are you awake?" Sierra walked downstairs in her robe and slippers, playing the role of a frightened woman, grateful for his return. Alistair stood in her kitchen, but something was different about him. The charming smile was gone, replaced by cold, hard calculation. "Alistair." "Thank God you're here," Sierra said, noting that Agent Kim was listening intently from the top of the stairs. Her presence a silent assurance. "I've been so scared." "Have you?" Alistair stepped closer, and Sierra caught a glimpse of something that made her blood run cold. There was a gun tucked into his waistband, a dark, lethal glint of metal against his shirt. "Alistair, I just want this nightmare to end." "So do I, Sierra." "So do I." He moved toward the guest room, but stopped suddenly, turning back to face her. "You know, I've been thinking about our conversation tonight, about how frightened you are, how much you want this to end." "Yes." Sierra tried to keep her voice steady, her heart hammering against her ribs. "And I realized something. You're not frightened at all, are you?" The question hung in the air like a trap about to spring cold and sharp. "Of course I'm frightened. The police, the investigation. The police investigation that you started. The detailed complaint that you filed. The forensic accountant that you hired." Alistair's voice was perfectly calm, but his eyes were dangerous, glittering with a cold fury. "Sierra, you've been playing a game since the day I arrived here." Sierra heard Agent Kim shift subtly at the top of the stairs, a faint rustle of fabric. But Alistair was between Sierra and any escape route. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." Alistair reached for his waistband. "I think you know exactly what I mean. That's when everything went wrong with the FBI's careful plan. Federal agents." Agent Martinez's voice boomed from the kitchen doorway, shattering the tense silence. "Hands where I can see them." Alistair spun around, pulling his weapon in one smooth, practiced motion. "I don't think so." Alistair dropped the weapon. Agent Kim appeared at the top of the stairs, her own gun drawn, aiming steadily. "Nobody moves," Alistair shouted, swinging his gun between the 2 agents, his breath ragged. "Sierra, you're going to walk with me to my car, and we're going to drive away from here." "Alistair, don't be stupid," Sierra said, surprising herself with how calm her voice sounded. "There are agents surrounding this house. Then they'll get to watch you die if they try to stop me." Agent Martinez was slowly advancing from the kitchen. His posture coiled, while Agent Kim remained frozen at the top of the stairs, her weapon trained on Alistair. He was cornered, which made him exponentially more dangerous. Alistair, Sierra said carefully, trying to buy time. What exactly do you think you're going to accomplish here? I'm going to retrieve what I came for, and then you and I are going to disappear until I can arrange safe passage out of the country. And what did you come for? Alistair smiled, and for the first time since Sierra had met him, the expression was completely genuine, utterly devoid of charm, brimming instead with chilling malice. You really think it was about that hard drive, didn't you? The hard drive is worthless. Everything important is stored in offshore servers that the FBI will never access. Alistair gestured with his gun toward her living room. What I came for is worth much more than some financial records. What, you Sierra? I came back for you. The words hit Sierra like a physical blow, cold and heavy. What are you talking about? Do you have any idea what your testimony is worth to federal prosecutors? You're their star witness. The victim who was smart enough to see through my operation and brave enough to report it. Alistair's smile widened a truly monstrous thing. If something tragic happened to you, their entire case would collapse. Agent Kim spoke from the stairs, her voice strained. Alistair, you're only making this worse for yourself. Am I? He sneered. Because from where I'm standing, eliminating their primary witness seems like excellent crisis management. Sierra felt a chill spread through her chest as she realized Alistair's real plan. He hadn't come back for evidence or personal belongings. He'd come back to kill her. The other victims can still testify, Sierra said, trying to push past the knot of fear. Elderly victims with questionable memories, telling stories about complex financial transactions they never understood. Alistair shook his head, a dismissive gesture. Without your detailed documentation and credible testimony, I could beat those charges in court. Alistair Agent Martinez called from the kitchen, his voice a low growl. You're surrounded. There's no way you're leaving this house alive if you hurt Mrs. Finch. Maybe not. Alistair shot back, his eyes fixed on Sierra. But Mrs. Finch definitely isn't leaving this house alive if I don't get exactly what I want. That's when Sierra realized something that changed everything. Alistair was right about being cornered, but he was wrong about having control. Because while he'd been focused on the FBI agents and his escape plan, he'd forgotten about the one person in this room who'd been 3 steps ahead of him from the beginning. Alistair, Sierra said, stepping slightly closer to him, her voice resonating with an icy calm. You're forgetting something important. What's that? He snarled, momentarily distracted. You're not the only person in this room who's been planning ahead. Sierra pressed the panic button that Agent Kim had given her earlier. Instead of triggering a standard alarm, it activated something Alistair couldn't possibly have expected. Every light in her house went out simultaneously, plunging them into complete, disorienting darkness. But more importantly, the electromagnetic pulse generator that Harold Manning had hidden in her basement activated, disabling every electronic device within a 50-foot radius, including Alistair's gun, which contained an electronic safety mechanism. In the chaos of complete darkness and Alistair's confused shouts, Sierra heard Agent Martinez moving swiftly toward them. Alistair fired twice, but the electronic firing mechanism failed both times, producing only a muffled click. What the hell? Alistair's voice was panicked, now stripped of its earlier bravado. Surprise! Alistair, Sierra said from somewhere in the darkness, her voice cool and cutting. Turns out, this helpless middle-aged woman had a few more tricks than you expected. The lights came back on 30 seconds later, revealing Alistair on the ground, with Agent Martinez kneeling on his back, efficiently securing his wrists. Agent Kim moved quickly to retrieve his weapon, her face a mixture of admiration and exasperation as she looked at Sierra. That was not part of the plan. Agent Kim said, a wry smile finally breaking through her professional facade. No. Sierra agreed, a faint smile playing on her lips, but it worked. As they led Alistair away in handcuffs, he turned back to look at Sierra one last time, his eyes burning with impotent fury. This isn't over, Sierra. Yes, Alistair, it really is. But as Sierra watched the FBI car disappear down her driveway, she couldn't shake the feeling that Alistair was right about one thing. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. 3 days after Alistair's arrest, Sierra discovered that catching a federal fugitive in her living room was actually the easy part. The hard part was dealing with what Alistair had left behind, both literally and figuratively. "Mother, you can't stay here," Evelyn said for the 5th time that morning. What if Alistair has associates who decide to finish what he started? They were sitting on Sierra's deck, watching federal agents search every inch of her property for additional evidence. Agent Martinez had assured her that Alistair's operation was sophisticated enough to potentially involve other criminals who might see Sierra as a threat. "Evelyn, I'm not running away from my own home because of Alistair's associates. This isn't about running away. This is about being smart. Being smart is exactly what got us to this point." Sierra gestured toward the FBI team, currently dismantling her guest room with methodical precision. "If I'd been less smart, Alistair would have succeeded in stealing my house and probably killing me." "That's not exactly reassuring." Agent Kim approached them from the house, carrying a laptop bag, and wearing an expression Sierra had learned to recognize as signaling significant news. "Mrs. Finch, we need to discuss what we found in Alistair's hidden files. More evidence of fraud." Sierra asked, her voice calm, despite the knot of apprehension forming in her stomach. "Evidence of something much bigger than fraud." Agent Kim sat down at Sierra's patio table and opened the laptop. Alistair wasn't just running investment scams. He was part of an organized network that specifically targets affluent women for what they call asset liberation. "Asset liberation," Evelyn whispered, horrified. "Systematic theft through relationship manipulation. They identify women with valuable assets, research their personal lives and vulnerabilities, then assign operatives to establish romantic or family relationships to gain access." Evelyn looked sick, her face ashen. "You're saying Alistair was assigned to target my mother?" "We're saying Alistair didn't meet you by accident, Mrs. Vance. You were selected because of your relationship to your mother and her property holdings." Sierra felt something cold settle in her stomach. "How long have they been watching me? According to these files, your property was identified as a target 18 months ago. Alistair spent 6 months researching your family relationships before approaching your daughter." Evelyn was staring at Agent Kim with growing horror. "Everything about our relationship was planned. The coffee shop where you met, the activities you enjoyed together, even his interest in your hobbies. It was all carefully orchestrated based on psychological profiles they'd developed." "Psychological profiles." Sierra repeated the implications, chilling. Agent Kim turned the laptop screen toward them. "They have detailed assessments of your personality, your financial habits, your relationship with your daughter, even your daily routine. Alistair knew exactly how to manipulate both of you." Sierra looked at the screen and saw a file labeled Sierra Finch Target Assessment. Below it were subfiles, financial assets, psychological vulnerabilities, social connections, and something called elimination protocols. "What are elimination protocols?" Sierra asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know. "Contingency plans for what to do if a target becomes problematic. In your case, they had 3 options: discreditation, incapacitation, and/or termination." "Termination," Evelyn whispered, her eyes wide with terror. They were planning to kill her, only if the other methods failed. But Mrs. Finch's resistance to Alistair's initial approach triggered their escalation procedures. Sierra thought about Alistair standing in her kitchen with a gun, calmly explaining that eliminating her would collapse the federal case against him. It hadn't been a desperate decision. It had been a calculated business strategy. "Agent Kim, how many other women are currently being targeted by this network?" Sierra asked, her voice tight. "Based on what we found so far, at least 30 active operations across 12 states. 30 women who don't know they're being systematically manipulated by professional criminals." "Exactly." Sierra stood up and walked to her deck railing, looking out at the ocean that had been her sanctuary for 5 years. The waves were exactly the same as they'd been yesterday, but everything else felt different now. A profound shift had occurred, one that resonated deeply within her. "What happens next?" she asked, turning back to Agent Kim. "Alistair has agreed to cooperate with our investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's providing information about the network's operations leadership structure and other targets. And the other women, we're working to identify and protect them. But Mrs. Finch, your case is crucial to our prosecution strategy. You're the only target who recognized the scam and documented it thoroughly enough to build a federal case, which means you'll need to testify in multiple trials, potentially over the next 2 years, and you'll need to remain available and protected during that entire period." Evelyn stood up abruptly, her face aghast. 2 years, Mother? You can't live under federal protection for 2 years. Actually, Agent Kim said we have a proposal that might interest both of you. She explained that the FBI was developing a task force specifically to combat romance and family relationship fraud, targeting older adults. They needed someone with Sierra's experience and analytical skills to help identify other operations and train agents to recognize the warning signs. "You want me to become a federal consultant?" Sierra asked, a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years, purpose stirring within her. "We want you to help us stop other women from going through what you experienced and what Eleanor Patterson and Rosalind Sterling experienced." Sierra thought about Eleanor's frightened voice on the phone, about Rosalind's destroyed business, about the 30 women currently being manipulated by criminals who'd studied their psychological vulnerabilities. What would that involve? Training sessions with agents and victims, reviewing case files to identify patterns, and occasionally serving as an undercover consultant when we encounter sophisticated operations. Women like yourself who've survived these attacks are uniquely qualified to help other targets recognize the warning signs. Sometimes the best way to break up an operation is to have someone with your experience approach the target directly. Evelyn was shaking her head vigorously. "Mother, this sounds incredibly dangerous. More dangerous than pretending these networks don't exist." Sierra looked at her daughter, her gaze piercing. "Evelyn Alistair fooled you completely. He fooled Rosalind Sterling. He fooled Eleanor Patterson and at least 12 other women. But he didn't fool me." "Because you were suspicious of him from the beginning?" Evelyn asked. "Because I'd learned to trust my own judgment over other people's charm." Sierra turned back to Agent Kim. "What kind of protection would be provided for these undercover operations? Full surveillance backup teams and extraction protocols. You'd never be in actual danger. Just like Alistair's arrest was supposed to be completely safe." Agent Kim had the grace to look embarrassed. "That operation had complications we didn't anticipate. But we've learned from those mistakes." Sierra spent the rest of the afternoon thinking about Agent Kim's proposal. The idea of helping other women avoid Alistair's type of manipulation was appealing. But the reality of putting herself in potentially dangerous situations was sobering. That evening, while Evelyn made dinner, Sierra called Rosalind Sterling. "Sierra, how are you holding up after everything that happened?" Rosalind's voice was warm with concern. "I'm okay, Rosalind, but I wanted to ask you something. If you'd had someone to warn you about Alistair's methods before he destroyed your business, would that have made a difference?" "Absolutely. If I'd known what to look for, I never would have trusted him with my company, even if that someone had to put themselves at risk to reach you." Rosalind was quiet for a moment. "Are you thinking about working with the FBI?" "I'm thinking about making sure Alistair's network doesn't destroy any more lives." "Then I think you should do it. And I think you should know that I'm planning to do it too." After she hung up, Sierra found Evelyn sitting on the deck with 2 glasses of wine. "Mother, I need to tell you something," she said, as Sierra joined her. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened, about how Alistair manipulated both of us, about how I let him treat you." Evelyn let me finish. "I've spent my whole adult life looking for someone else to make me feel important, valuable, worth something. Alistair was just the latest in a long line of people I thought would complete me." She took a sip of wine, her gaze distant, contemplative. "And now I think maybe I need to learn how to complete myself first." She looked at Sierra directly, a new maturity in her eyes. I want to help with this FBI task force thing, Evelyn. You don't have the experience for. I have different experience. I know what it feels like to be manipulated by someone like Alistair. I know how they make you feel special and important while they're actually using you. She took a deep breath. Maybe there are other women out there who need to hear from someone who fell for it completely before they learn to see through it. As Sierra sat there watching the sunset with her daughter, she realized that Alistair's biggest mistake hadn't been underestimating Sierra. It had been bringing them together in a way that forced them both to become stronger than they'd ever been apart. Tomorrow, Sierra would call Agent Kim and accept her proposal. But tonight she was just going to enjoy the fact that her daughter had finally figured out the difference between being used and being valued. Alistair's network had no idea what was coming for them. 6 months later, Sierra was sitting in a coffee shop in Portland, Oregon, pretending to read a romance novel while watching a woman named Carol Peterson unknowingly have lunch with the man who was planning to steal her house. His name was Marcus Thorne, and according to FBI intelligence, he was Alistair's former partner and the current operational leader of what the task force had dubbed the Heartbreak Network. Carol was a 58-year-old widow who'd inherited a successful bed and breakfast from her late husband, and Marcus had been courting her for 3 months. Sierra, can you see the subject clearly? Agent Chen's voice came through the nearly invisible earpiece Sierra was wearing. I can see both of them, Sierra murmured into the microphone hidden in her book jacket. Marcus is showing her some kind of financial documents. That's the property management proposal. He's about to suggest that she needs professional help running her business. Sierra, we need you to make contact now. Carol's about to sign preliminary documents. Sierra closed her book and walked to their table, channeling every ounce of confused elderly woman she could manage. Excuse me, she said to Carol, her voice a little tremulous. Aren't you Carol Peterson? We met at the grief support group in Salem. Carol looked up, clearly confused. I'm sorry, I don't think we've met. Oh my goodness. You look so much like a woman I met who was dealing with the same situation I went through. A charming man convinced her to let him manage her late husband's business assets, and it turned out he was stealing everything. Sierra glanced at Marcus, who was studying her with interest, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. I'm sorry, Marcus said smoothly, an edge of impatience in his tone. But we're having a private business meeting. Of course, of course. Sierra started to turn away, then stopped. Carol, you said your name was Carol, right? Just be careful about anyone who approaches you with investment advice too soon after a loss. These predators specifically target widows who own valuable property. Ma'am, Marcus's voice had an undeniable edge, now his charm cracking. Now you're interrupting our conversation with inappropriate paranoia. Oh, you're probably right. Sierra smiled at him with the sweet confusion of someone easily dismissed. I'm sure you're nothing like Alistair Vance. Marcus went completely still, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly. Who? Alistair Vance. He used the same approach. Charming, helpful, very concerned about proper asset management. Of course, he's in federal prison now for elder fraud. Carol was looking back and forth between them, a dawning note of doubt in her eyes. Marcus, do you know this man she's talking about? I've never heard that name before, Marcus said. But his eyes never left Sierra's face. His composure was slipping. Oh, well, you probably wouldn't have. It was quite a scandal, though. He was part of some criminal network that targeted women with valuable real estate. They'd research your property, your family situation, your psychological profile, then send someone to manipulate you into signing over control of your assets. That sounds terrible, Carol said. And Sierra could hear the first note of genuine alarm in her voice. It was. Poor Eleanor Patterson lost her entire family home, and Rosalind Sterling lost her business. Sierra looked directly at Marcus, a challenge in her gaze. Though I suppose you'd know more about Rosalind Sterling than I would. Marcus stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back with a clatter. Carol, we should continue this conversation elsewhere, actually, Sierra said. Sitting down in his vacant chair, her confused elderly woman act vanishing. I think Carol should hear about the investigation before she signs anything. What investigation? Carol asked, her voice tight with fear. The FBI task force that's currently tracking at least 12 active operations targeting widows with valuable property. They have quite a sophisticated network, detailed psychological profiles, backup stories, even fake references. Marcus was edging away from the table, his face white. Carol, this woman is clearly unstable. I think we should sit down, Marcus. Agent Chen appeared behind him, her badge visible, a quiet, deadly authority emanating from her. FBI Financial Crimes Task Force. The arrest went smoothly after that. Marcus had enough outstanding warrants that he couldn't fight extradition, and the documents in his briefcase provided evidence linking him to at least 6 other ongoing cases. Carol, Sierra said, as Agent Chen led Marcus away, his face a mask of defeat. You should know that you were never in any real danger. We've been watching this operation for months. You're with the FBI? Carol asked, still a little dazed. I'm a consultant, someone who survived the same type of attack you were about to experience. Carol stared at the papers Marcus had tried to get her to sign, her hand trembling. I was really going to sign these, wasn't I? Probably. Marcus is very good at what he does. But now he won't be doing it anymore. That evening, Sierra called Evelyn from her hotel room in Portland. How did it go? Mother Evelyn's voice was bright, eager. We prevented another victim and arrested a major player in Alistair's network. I'd call that a successful day. How many does that make now? 14 prevented thefts, 7 major arrests, and about $2 million in recovered assets returned to victims. And how many more operations are still active? Too many, Sierra admitted, gazing out at the rainy Portland cityscape, but fewer every month. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Mother, do you ever regret getting involved in all this? You could have just stayed home and let Alistair face justice without turning this into your life's work. Sierra thought about Carol Peterson, who would go home tonight to her bed and breakfast instead of signing documents that would have eventually left her homeless. She thought about Eleanor Patterson, whose house had been saved from foreclosure with recovered assets from Alistair's offshore accounts. She thought about the 37 women who were currently living peacefully in their own homes because someone had warned them before it was too late. Evelyn, do you remember when Alistair first suggested I needed help managing my life? Unfortunately, yes. Evelyn said, a hint of shame in her voice. I realized something that day. The world is full of people who assume that women like me are helpless, confused and grateful for male guidance. Alistair was just the criminal version of an attitude that's everywhere. And now, Evelyn prompted softly, and now I spend my time proving that we're not helpless. We're not confused. And we definitely don't need guidance from men who see our independence as a problem to be solved even when it's dangerous. Especially when it's dangerous, Evelyn echoed. 2 days later, Sierra was back home on her deck in Malibu, watching the waves and reading case files for the next operation. Agent Kim was arriving tomorrow to brief her on a new network operating out of Phoenix, and Evelyn was driving down from Los Angeles to spend the weekend. Her phone rang, and Sierra recognized the number as Rosalind Sterling. Sierra, I wanted to give you an update on the Seattle operation. How did it go? We prevented 3 more victims and identified a connection to that Miami case you worked last month. This network is even bigger than we originally thought. Good work, Rosalind. How are you holding up? Better than I expected. There's something satisfying about using Alistair's own methods against his associates. After they hung up, Sierra sat in the gathering twilight, thinking about the path that had brought her here. A year ago, she'd been a woman enjoying peaceful retirement in her beach house. Now she was a federal consultant who spent her time protecting other women from sophisticated criminals. Alistair had been right about one thing. His arrest hadn't been the end of anything. It had been the beginning of a task force that had become a model for other states. the beginning of partnerships with victim advocacy groups and elder protection agencies, the beginning of congressional hearings about romance fraud and legislative changes to strengthen prosecution tools. But most importantly, it had been the beginning of something Alistair could never have anticipated: a network of women who refused to be victims. Her phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn. "Mum just passed the exit for your house. Can't wait to hear about Portland." Also, Agent Kim called. "They want us both for the Phoenix operation. Are you up for another adventure?" Sierra smiled, her thumb hovering over the reply button. Always. As she prepared for bed that night in her house, her safe, secure, protected house that no one would ever take from her, she thought about Alistair in his federal prison cell. He'd spent his career assuming that women like her were easy targets, isolated and vulnerable. He'd been wrong about the isolated part too. Tomorrow, Evelyn and Sierra would start planning how to dismantle another criminal network. Next week, Rosalind Sterling and Sierra would testify at a congressional hearing about romance fraud. Next month, Sierra would train a new group of FBI agents to recognize the psychological manipulation tactics used by relationship predators. Alistair had tried to steal her home. Instead, he'd given her a purpose that was bigger than any house, more valuable than any bank account, and more satisfying than any peaceful retirement could have been. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's becoming exactly what your enemies never expected you to become. And what Alistair had never expected was that this helpless, middle-aged woman would become the kind of person who made sure that criminals like him never succeeded again. In the labyrinth of life where paths diverge and challenges emerge, Sierra's story is a stark reminder that true worth is an inner fortress, not an external validation. We often look for external sources to define our value: a partner's affection, a child's approval, the security of possessions. But when these external structures falter, or worse, are threatened by deceit, it is our internal resilience, our deep-seated belief in self, that becomes our ultimate shield and sword. Sierra's journey from a tranquil existence to a calculated act of self-preservation illustrates that the quiet strength of intuition, once dismissed as paranoia or overthinking, can be the most potent weapon against manipulation. It speaks to the insidious nature of emotional and financial predators who thrive on perceived vulnerability, but also to the dormant power within each of us to reclaim our narratives. Her narrative isn't just about catching a criminal. It's about the profound awakening to one's own power, the realization that self-worth isn't granted, but cultivated. It's a call to trust that gut feeling, to question what seems too good to be true, and to understand that protecting one's peace is an active, sometimes dangerous endeavor. If you saw yourself in Sierra's story, if you've ever felt the sting of betrayal, or the slow burn of being undervalued, know that your voice matters. Your intuition is valid, and your strength is immeasurable. Share your own experiences below. Subscribe to narratives that empower, and remember, the most beautiful sanctuaries are often those built from within. May you find your own peace, and may you find your own peace and the courage to protect it always. In the labyrinth of life where paths diverge and challenges emerge, Sierra's story is a stark reminder that true worth is an inner fortress, not an external validation. We often look for external sources to define our value: a partner's affection, a child's approval, the security of possessions. But when these external structures falter, or worse, are threatened by deceit, it is our internal resilience, our deep-seated belief in self, that becomes our ultimate shield and sword. Sierra's journey from a tranquil existence to a calculated act of self-preservation illustrates that the quiet strength of intuition, once dismissed as paranoia or overthinking, can be the most potent weapon against manipulation. It speaks to the insidious nature of emotional and financial predators who thrive on perceived vulnerability, but also to the dormant power within each of us to reclaim our narratives. Her narrative isn't just about catching a criminal. It's about the profound awakening to one's own power, the realization that self-worth isn't granted but cultivated. It's a call to trust that gut feeling, to question what seems too good to be true, and to understand that protecting one's peace is an active, sometimes dangerous endeavor. If you saw yourself in Sierra's story, if you've ever felt the sting of betrayal or the slow burn of being undervalued, know that your voice matters, your intuition is valid, and your strength is immeasurable. Share your own experiences below. Subscribe to narratives that empower, and remember, the most beautiful sanctuaries are often those built from within. May you find your own peace and the courage to protect it always. The end.